All right, thanks, Jeannie. So yeah, this morning we're going to talk all about watercraft decontamination. Sort of my partner in crime, and probably I'm sort of like the second in command, maybe in putting the morning together, is Tim Campbell. Tim, did you want to say anything before we get going?
That was a long wait for me to say no, not really, but excited to talk to you all about decon. We've been working on this project or trying to get it off the ground for a while. So hopefully we're there, and hopefully this about 90 minutes we have put together for you all is kind of a good start to this hopefully longer project that you'll hear a little bit more about today.
Absolutely. So I'll give a little bit of an overview to start out with of what it is, what this project is that we're working on. We'll have some examples of watercraft decontamination projects that are going on, and then kind of end everything with a discussion, an open discussion in breakout rooms of what it is as a partnership that we think about all this, and try to gather some information and ideas from you all. So I am Mike Engleson. I'm the executive director of Wisconsin Lakes, and I know some of you are new to the meeting, so I thought I'd give a little bit of a background about the organization to start out with. We are the statewide nonprofit association of lake organizations and lake stakeholders. We've been around since 1992, when the Association of Lake Districts and the Association of Lake Associations merged into one entity. So we will be celebrating our 30th anniversary next year. I feel like the 25th anniversary campaign just ended, so hard to believe it's been already 5 years since that. We work on, or most of our membership is lake organizations and waterfront property owners for the most part. We provide technical assistance to those organizations, so everything from how to organize to how to run a meeting to how to, how to get ordinances passed at a local level and things such as that. We do a lot of work with the Lakes and Rivers Partnership. We team up with Eric Olson and Extension Lakes at Stevens Point and DNR Lakes and Rivers section. We work on the Lakes and Rivers Convention, which is April 6th to the 8th, planning to be in person in Stevens Point, and a couple of other regional events, the Northwest Wisconsin Lakes Conference, the Red Cedar Watershed Conference down in Dunn County, Menominee. And then we are an advocacy organization. So I am a lobbyist. I spend not a whole lot of time in the Capitol working with legislators. I also teach people how to do advocacy and how their groups can do advocacy and that sort of thing. So one of our new focus areas that we really are just beginning to really ramp up on, we're calling our recreational impact initiative. And this came about because the constant refrain that I have heard over the last 5-6 years has been, we've got a lot of problems with bigger boats, more powerful boats that create large wakes, like wake boats and wake surf craft and things like that. We've got all of these problems related to this. And literally, I get probably 4 or 5 calls a week about it. If you've talked to any lake organization people, it's probably come up in conversations at some point. So obviously, there are safety and ecological impact questions about that, but there's also an aquatic invasive species issue, especially with wake boats and whether or not in the ballast tanks organisms can be transported. So we also had this program in discussion about working on watercraft decontamination, and it all seems to fit really well together. So I've kind of lumped this AIS piece under our recreational impact campaign. So when you hear us out and about talking about our recreational impact work, know that AIS is still a pretty major focus and piece of that, not just in terms of whether ballast tanks can add transport problems for wake boats, but just in general, and certainly watercraft decontamination is a big piece of that. And I should add, I have a great board of directors that helps me out on a lot of stuff, but for the most part, our staff is myself. I'm full-time and do most of the substantive programmatic work. I have a half-time membership and development person. So if you have a question about anything, I'm pretty much the only guy to come talk to you about it because I'm the only one that's doing the work. So the project, this idea actually started, as Tim alluded to, a long time ago. Some of you may be thinking, did I already hear this talk once? And it's like, yeah, you probably did, because I've given it a few times in various forms. So this started when Bob Wakeman and I were talking really about some like policy needs for the state and whether there was any kind of legislative package or something. And we got talking about decontamination techniques and stuff about that. And I said, you know, we are getting, it seems like we're getting a pretty good sense of with different watercraft decontamination techniques, how effective they are in removing AIS from a watercraft if they're used properly. The question is, will they be used, even let alone used properly? So we thought it would be a good idea to do some sort of research to help inform a statewide strategy to promote different systems, to get some research done on how both recreational users, so the boaters themselves, and the whatever entity it is that's implementing the decontamination system is going to react to different scenarios and different possibilities. So questions like, does it make a difference whether it's voluntary or involuntary that the boater has to do it? What's the likelihood of and the capacity of most lake associations to be able to handle a CD3 unit versus, you know, keeping a beach bucket up to date and filled and clean and all those sorts of things. So that's all the kind of stuff that we thought we wanted to try to get out of this. And so we bandied this about for a while. We worked out a deal with where Wisconsin Lakes would be doing a lot of the work through a contract with DNR. We got the contract all set up, and then COVID-19 hit. Because of the pandemic, I was spending all of my time helping organizations figure out how to run meetings and things like that. And so, you know, the contract, I think, landed on my desk in January of 2020. So everything got put on hold. And we've now come to the current state where we've got just found out we've got a new agreement that's just about to come through. So all of this should be able to get started this fall. And what we want to do is really a two-part project. So in part one, we're going to take a look, we're going to do that study. It'll be a survey, and I'll get into detail on both of these on a couple of other slides. So we'll be doing a study of the attitudes of varying stakeholders towards various decontamination strategies and scenarios. And then part two, which is most of what I want to talk about today, I've called information collection and dissemination. So I'll get to that in a moment. But first, to talk a little bit about what we want to do with the study. Like I said, we want to reach both users and implementers to get information from both of them. It'll be a survey similar to kind of what Brett talked about yesterday with the homeowner's perception and past voter surveys that Tim has done. And Tim, if you want to jump in at any point and talk about any of this, feel free. In addition to the survey, we'll do focus groups and some interviews to get some additional information, and then have some sort of written report at the end. And I do want to thank Carol Shaw and Amy for helping us get the funding reset. We wouldn't be able to do this without this help. I'm hoping this becomes, as I said, a bigger part of our recreational impact initiative, which I'm looking for some major private foundation funding to help out with, and we'll be able to amp this up even more in the future, but that remains to be seen. So what the piece that I think will be of most immediate interest to most of you is this info collection and work group piece. And that's really got three components to it. we want to create an inventory of decontamination stations in the state or decontamination projects in the state, collect information about what they are, where they are, how they work, whether there are any laws or ordinances that are attached to their use or anything like that. And I see this as a living document that will keep updating constantly. It'll give us the information we need to go back to different places to find out how things are going, so that we can really get a handle on where things are and how, and maybe eventually how effective we're being in the way that they're being implemented. I think when we started this project, there weren't a whole lot of these systems out in the landscape. Now there are more, so we actually have some real world examples that we can look at to see how different stakeholders are reacting to them that will be informative for the study, as well as just for all of us in general. So we want to know what's going on and the successes and failures of those implementations. To help us along with all of that, I'd like to establish a informal voluntary work group of professionals who are doing this sort of work. I obviously don't have the background. It's not the thing that I do day to day that you all do. So if we can get a group of people together to talk about, to sort of help figure out what information in that inventory would be good to collect and keep, talk about best practices and what's working between them. So it's an opportunity for people to network. That came out of a conversation that we had at a previous partnership meeting in Stevens Point. So I don't know if that was 2018 or early 2019, but there was some discussion that it would be helpful among professionals that are doing these sorts of projects to have a forum to interact. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the work group in a second. But then we'll take all of that information that we've collected, the other research that we've found and things like that, and kind of like we talked about with Brett for just AIS information in general, my vision was to put together some sort of informational hub that can contain all of this. So it could be a standalone website that anyone is able to access, or it could be as simple as a folder on the Box account, but someplace where anybody that's working on this stuff can go to find out what it is that we've discovered. We get enough, I know from my own experience, I get enough questions from members and from leaders of lake organizations about decontamination that I think having something out there that is pretty comprehensive that the public could get to would definitely be helpful. So that's sort of where I see this going in the long run. And so the work group, I think the plan would be to meet probably quarterly, though I really would like this to be self-directed. So if it seemed like it needed to meet more, it definitely could. If it needed to break out into subgroups, if there were enough people that were interested and there were enough issues that there were subgroups, we can go that direction. If it really only needs to meet, twice a year at at partnership meetings or as part of those, that would work as well. So really, if you are interested in being on that, you don't necessarily have to think of it as a prescribed commitment. It's also voluntary. So, at some point we need, hopefully there will be organic success where we have a core of enough people that are interested that keeps it going. But it's not like I think everybody has to be at every meeting or it's going to add a lot of time to your workload. I'm trying to do this in order to make your lives easier and more effective in terms of decontamination. So that group will help advise, as I said, on what the inventory might need to collect and how that info hub would end up looking, and then we'd be able to implement it. So I'm hoping that we can get something together and have a first organizational meeting of it sometime in November. I will put that form link in the chat, and I have it set up. So that's just a Google form to collect your name and contact information if you want to be on the list for when we set up the doodle to set up the first meeting. And I'm also available to answer any questions at any time. So I put my contact information there. I'll put it in the chat when we're done as well. So that's all I have. I don't know, Jeannie, do we want to do questions or do we want to move straight into the next stuff?
Your preference. It's you guys' session.
I'm happy to take any questions on the concept in general or what we're thinking of the work group, or upfront comments if people think this is a crazily stupid idea or something as well. It's morning, I'm still optimistic, so I take criticism early.
Well, there's 57 us on now, so there should be some opinions out there. And if anybody can't unmute and talk, go ahead and use the chat. And Mike has the sign up for the Decon work group link in there also.
Hey, Mike, Chris Acey here. Question for you. When you're talking about decontamination and thinking about this inventory, are you thinking solely, hot water pressure for decontamination, or what scale are you using to determine is this actual decontamination versus not?
That's a good question, Chris, and that might be something that the work group will be able to help nail down that definition. But I'm thinking of it in as broad a terms as possible. So everything from brushes and tools and a beach bucket that's set out, on a however many times that gets changed out, up to a fixed hot water wash with CD3 units somewhere in the middle there. Tim, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I have a slide in my presentation on definitions because, words matter and I love that. So I do think that might be something really good for our group to kind of figure out, because I think there's a prevailing definition of decontamination nationally, and we might be operating under a different definition of that word. So we might want to talk about what exactly we mean and what we want to incorporate here, because I think we want to be more broad than just kind of that more national definition of decontamination, which is hot water, high pressure wash, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah, I was wondering. I was like, well, that'll be a short inventory list, maybe. I think, but that sounds good. Excited for it.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons why it's important to figure that out and maybe be broader, as Tim says, I think, is because, again, if we limit ourselves to only promoting the hot wash and there aren't enough areas that are able to implement that, then that's not, even if that's the most effective way to clean a boat, if it's not being used, then it's not overall effective across the state. So the idea here is to try to eventually get to a point where we have enough information that the state really can provide some different scenarios based on capacity and affordability of different ways to do this that can be effective in different areas.
Anyone else? If not, let's see, next up, we are going to hear about a couple of particular decontamination projects going on. Both happen to be in the north. And first up, we have Ramona Shackleford from Northwoods Cooperative Weed Management Area. So Ramona, if you want to go ahead and you can share your screen.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Here we go. Let's see. not sure why it's not sharing.
Um,
Oh, it
the-
says host disabled participant.
oh,
participant
that's weird.
screen
Oh,
sharing.
I know what's going on. Yeah, Mike was able to do it because, no, I've got multiple participants. Give it another try. That's odd.
Okay, now it looks like it will.
Okay, that was weird.
Okay, here we go. All right, so my name is Ramona Shackleford from the Northwoods Cooperative Weed Management Area, and we have a portable, we call it the boat wash program, and we have a portable high pressure washer that we take to different landings. And we got this, it actually is owned by the U.S. Forest Service. The Forest Service purchased it in 2012, and we maintain it and run it. We get funding to hire seasonal staff to run the boat wash. And it is used mostly on Lake Superior, but it can be on inland lakes in Iron, Ashland, Bayfield, and Douglas counties. And this funding is through GLRI funding, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So it is in Great Lakes Basin, and also because we are near the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. So the funding comes quite easily. We don't have to apply for grants. They distribute it through an agreement that we already have with them, and reporting is quite easy. So it makes running this program pretty easy to do. So for our program, we always have 2 people taking the boat wash out. Typically one is funded by the Clean Boats, Clean Waters program, and one is the boat wash through the boat wash funding. But this year, actually, it was completely funded by the boat wash. And again, most of the landings are on Lake Superior. This is Haley Heller, who worked this year. We had 2 really great seasonal staff. So before they go to the landings, they have a Clean Boats, Clean Waters training and also a boat washer training. And we practice having them start the motor and use it for washing. And they practice also driving and hooking up the boat wash and backing up the trailer. Sometimes they don't have any experience backing up trailers or running motors, which the 2 interns we had this year, they didn't have any experience, but they did a fabulous job. So it makes it worth it, giving them some new experiences. It's also important to have them visit the landings before they take the boat wash there, because it is hard, a little difficult to get it in the right place. So if we don't go to the sites beforehand, they'll look over maps, to see exactly where to park, where is the best place to get in and out. So they could just doing a driving loop through is the best, so they don't have to back it up much. So yesterday I kind of went through our records since we had this since 2012. The first 2 years it was very popular, and I don't know if it has to do with training or over time things have changed with the enthusiasm. But the very first 2 years, over 8 boats were washed per day on average over all the landings. 2014, there must have been some difference in how they trained folks, because it had a very low average number of boats washed per day, even though they went out 24 times. So I'm not sure what happened there. 2015 and 16, it did not go out at all. And then 2018 through 21, I have been here, and I know we actually have had good funding, but we have had trouble getting the staff to run it. So 2018, it only went out 5 times. 2019, I had plenty of money. I could have had it going all the time, but just couldn't get enough staff. So it went out 25 times. So if we look at that closer, they go to different landings, and this breaks down the different landings. And 2012, it went out 45 times. In 2021, it went out 48. So these 2 years, we had it used the most. And if you look at the different landings, we do have some similar landings. This year we had it very evenly sent out to the 4 counties, pretty much 12 times during the summer at each. But if you look at Career Park and Second Landing in Ashland County, it had over 8 washes per day in 2012. This year, less than 2 per day. And from talking to the staff, they said the people coming to that particular landing had no interest in being approached. They didn't want to be approached. They didn't want to do anything, and they were very unfriendly. So it was both of those were unpleasant landings for them to work at. But Loon's Foot, as you can see, has the most traffic, and it also has the most boats washed there. And so last summer we would have it there primarily on Saturdays because it had the most traffic. The Washburn Marina is a low traffic, relatively low traffic landing, but yet that one has, the people are much more open to having their boats washed. And it's lower traffic in Iron County. And for any of these landings, they may have no boats coming in. If it's a really windy day, there won't be as much traffic. So weather depends a lot. So how effective it is, it's great when it's used. And like the statistics show, that boater traffic varies greatly at the landings, and really the attitude of the boaters differs at the different landings. We've had the greatest support from the county land and water conservation departments. We don't have lakes associations really because it is Lake Superior. We don't really have volunteers. So just the support of the different AIS departments in the different counties is really important. So, decontamination is a great way to prevent the spread of invasive species, and important for awareness. And it does help people take cleaning seriously, I think. Even if they don't get their boat washed, I think they might think about the importance of doing that, and maybe they'll do it on their own. So it could prevent an infestation, but of course, there's a lot of days there's nothing there, and a lot of people don't wash their boats. If I had different funding, I'm not directly in AIS. So part of why we do this program is the funding is so easy to get through the Forest Service. We already have an agreement with them, and it's easy to report. The reporting is very easy. So that is part of why we have this funding. But I think, a combination of decontamination, maybe having some of the CD3 washers on the landings would help too. A few of the landings do have some type of hose, but people don't really, those landings, they might still have their boat washed with our decontamination system. So it's hard to know what the best way to do. I mean, it is something though that does help. I think one of the things that we have struggled with is that because it's through the Forest Service and we have an agreement with them, they don't allow other groups to borrow it. It would be nice if we could train more people in different lake associations or in different counties to be able to use it, and so they could borrow it on days where they know that they're going to have an event. So that flexibility would make it much nicer. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Ramona. Did anyone have, we have a minute or so, we could take a question. And also, there's a real good conversation going on in the chat about decontamination versus disinfection. So follow along with that too. But does anyone have a question for Ramona?
Yeah, and I was actually kind of reading the chat, so you may have said this and I might have missed it, but do you have any sense of why some landings are more amenable to have it work than others, and is it it's consistently one landing works most of the time and another landing it's not used as well, right?
I think in Ashland County or Ashland, it's what the two interns thought was that it's local people that are coming, and they will say they only go to Lake Superior. They're just coming for the day and they're going to come tomorrow. And so, you know, they don't see the point. So, and both of those were either on Thursday and Friday. I don't know if we did it on Saturday, if that might help. But there is a lot of actual second landing has a lot of people coming in and out. So it's a busy landing actually. So it is perplexing.
That's a good point. I've heard that elsewhere, the locals versus tourists, for lack of a better term. So thanks.
And Maureen had a question in the chat. Is there a hold harmless agreement for folks that use the steam cleaners?
So it's only our staff. So it's that is with the Forest Service. They won't allow any other groups to use it. So it's part of our agreement. So yeah, if we wanted other groups, if other groups could borrow it, I think you would have to have something like that in place. But yeah, we don't.
Yeah, and it's just, is there a liability for the operator if there's damage to boats? So does maybe the Forest Service cover that because it's their unit and they're letting you do it?
I would guess so, yeah.
Okay. All right.
I can follow up to the liability question, then I have a quick question for you, Ramona. So I think probably like 5 years ago, the National Sea Grant Law Center put together a legal memo for Wisconsin to provide some guidance on liability for decontamination operators in Wisconsin about who has liability, who can use the stations, what kind of training or guidance needs to be in place to limit the liability of operators. General guidance I felt like that came from this. You know, maybe Mike, actually, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so maybe talk to people at the Sea Grant Law Center first. But it seems like for government agencies, there's some Good Samaritan laws that generally protect government agencies from any sort of like damage or anything like that if they're trying to do something for the betterment of society. So if they were washing a boat and it somehow got damaged, as long as there was proper training in place for the staff, the liability to the government agency would be pretty low. But admittedly, it's been a while since I've read the memo, so I'm going to copy a link to the memo and the fact sheet in the chat so you can all look at that. I like having a chance to plug that when I can. But then my question for you, Ramona, is that, so it looks like there's some variability in people using the wash or the decontamination station. It could be site dependent, but could it also be like event dependent or season dependent? You know, if there's like a specific fishing season where you get a lot of visitors, or you know, if there's some sort of festival that you might get a lot of visitors. Like, have you tried any sort of like more fine scale data collection to see like if there's specific weekends or anything like that that get better, you know, use of the station?
This year we did attempt to have it go to more events. We did do one in Iron County. I think it was good because it was more visible and those people were not, I think, did not see a boat wash or decontamination washer before. But not a lot of the boats got washed, actually. They were all leaving at the same time and wanted to go. So it didn't actually get used as much, but definitely we're working at trying to get it at more events where there are more people. So trying to look for days that are have people coming. So yeah.
And I think as a quick follow-up, and Lindsay, you can maybe think about this question too. If there were a student or somebody to help, like if you all could collect the data and if somebody else could kind of, I don't know, organize it all for you and maybe do some of the analysis, how helpful would that be? If, you know, if somebody were to kind of, yeah, I guess help analyze some of that data for you all to try to pick out some of those trends.
That would be great. You mean like in the future? I don't know if our like future different type of data collection. I mean, it would be good for us to take more data and find what people are thinking a little bit more, because we are just doing the Clean Boats, Clean Water survey, so we haven't added anything to that. So
Okay.
yeah, that would be nice.
Zach's got his hands up with a question.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This project was pretty new this year, even though there was some work that Ramona referred to back in 2012. For most of us, we kind of got together and we made a Google Calendar where we put in their fishing tournaments and we kind of shared it amongst the 4 counties. And it was kind of our first year to be organized like this. So like Tim said, I would definitely suggest and watch the data over the next few years, because I think it's going to get better. It was really new to a lot of folks, and I think it kind of maybe caught them off guard. And I feel like we are on the right track. We've got maybe a new partnership moving forward about spiny water fleas that'll raise attention to these decontamination units. So I foresee this really working in the future. And yes, timing is definitely critical. There are times when Saxon Harbor in Iron County has all of the boats because Lake Superior is frozen, and that especially Chequamegon Bay, and all of Bayfield, Washburn, and Ashland and the UP go to Saxon Harbor, but it's April and May, and Ramona doesn't have staff hired yet at that time period. So we have a few things to work out, but timing is definitely critical in our result, I think.
Thank you for that. Good points. Lots still going on in the chat too, so make sure you're taking a look over there. But I want to go ahead and turn this over to Lindsay for her presentation on what RISC is doing. Lindsay is with Wild Rivers Invasive Species Coalition. So Lindsay, you can go ahead and share your screen. Nice picture, Zach.
All right, let me get this going. Okay, did that show up right?
Yep, you're looking good.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of similar to Ramona's, just kind of go over kind of the history of our decontamination program and what kind of works for us and what doesn't work, and just kind of go from there. Maybe if it'll move forward. There it goes. Okay. So for our program, we mostly focus on the Clean Boats, Clean Waters program, doing watercraft inspections, and then we also have portable pressure washer units or our boat washes. And then we also have like our education outreach component to that, which is, you know, focusing on like the clean, drain, dry, and the play, clean, go messaging is really kind of what we focus the program on. So just kind of like a quick history of RISC's program and how it started. You know, we kind of started way back in like 2011 and 12 was when we had our first projects funded, and we're able to purchase the portable boat wash unit. The first one, along with, we had 2 LTEs staffing that, and that was just in like Florence and Forest counties in the beginning with that small grant, which I think was Wisconsin specific. And then as we moved past that, in like 2013 was like our big year. And we had like a ton of money back then for this. I think there was like 3 or 4 separate grants that were focused on decontamination and AIS. So we had some from We Energies, we had some from Wisconsin DNR, GLRI, Boat US Foundation to do some more outreach. And so we were able to have like a really big crew in 2013 and 14 to focus on doing boat wash operation. And so 2013, especially when I show the data, is really gonna like reflect that. In 2014 and 15, we had about 6 seasonal staff. So not quite as much as we had in like 2013, which I think was like close to 12 staff or something like that between all of those grants. But still did quite a lot of work. We had a few different grants leaning more towards the GLRI funding through the Forest Service at this point. And then we had some Michigan invasive species money that also helped us buy a few pieces of equipment, especially like pavement stencils for boat landings and things like that. 2016, we got our third unit purchased through GLRI project with the Forest Service. And then the same year, now that we had the third unit, we developed a partner loan program so that partners could essentially like rent out the boat wash unit. And there was a whole, you know, kind of as the previous discussion, there was a liability agreement and insurance requirements and everything like that in place, and training required for partners to do that. And so in 2016, Marinette County utilized one of the risk boat washes. We've had Florence County utilize it a lot through that partner program. And then kind of 2017 till now has been pretty consistent. And honestly, like I feel like our program echoes Ramona's a lot. We've been doing Forest Service funding for the last few years, and really has been kind of bare bones crews for our boat wash program. We've been struggling with staffing and getting consistent staff for it for a couple of years now. And we did get a fourth boat wash unit, which was a donation from a local lake association. So we have 4 of these things kicking around, which, you know, comes with its own issues. Just to look at the funding, obviously Forest Service is through GLRI is like our biggest funding source. Second to that would be Wisconsin DNR funding, and We Energy's funding in the beginning was really the biggest kind of kickstart to the program. And then, like I had mentioned, there was those other couple grants in there kind of in the early years and midway through the program that kind of fed into that. Just looking at like some basic data, you can kind of see that 2013 and 14 were like, you know, kind of that start of the program after we got those bigger crews and all of those grants going on at once. That like there was a lot more time put into it, and we got a lot more reach in the program. But then after that, things kind of taper off and like level out for a little bit. And then, you know, there's some ups and downs in there. I think a big, you know, we don't have a ton of volunteer time that goes into this. We have a volunteer program for it, and we promote it a lot, but we've even had people come to trainings and like get trained to do it and then like never show up ever again. So it's a little bit odd in that sense. You know, lake associations get really excited about the program, and a lot of times their associations want to volunteer and set up their own thing, and then kind of just don't get it together in time. But I don't know. I think one of our big struggles lately has just been the staffing and getting consistent staff to run the program. So we try typically to run our boat wash like Wednesday through Sundays. And we try and hire a separate crew just for boat wash, because there's been a few years, and some of these years where our numbers are a lot lower, it's getting covered by our strike team, which is out doing, you know, terrestrial management and monitoring. And then they get, you know, kind of shanghaied into this weekend rotation. And, you know, then they end up working a lot of days at once, or, you know, they just kind of are burned out after the week. And boat wash is a totally different pace than, you know, doing like wild parsnip treatments all week or something. So it doesn't really seem to work very well, just like for overall staff morale, definitely. And it can be difficult with the scheduling. So that seems to be something I like to try and avoid. But there's a lot of challenges in that too. So looking like more specifically at some of the successes, like the program in our area is really well received. We don't end up with a lot of issues with folks. There's a couple of times where we've had, you know, something, you know, you get those kind of like standard encounters at some boat landings that are completely like AIS irrelevant, you know, people that are just unhappy about everything in general. But overall, the program is becoming really recognizable throughout our region. you know, a lot of people see us, they know right away what the program is, they know to just like come get their boat washed. So that's really encouraging. There's still a few areas that, you know, we do get people who've never heard of Clean Boats, Clean Waters or don't know what AIS is. And so that's also encouraging that we get to continue to reach new people. And it's not just the same people every single year. We've also developed some really strong partnerships through this with our lake associations, especially certain groups, and just through like our county partners and things like that, people who are utilizing our boat washes when they're available, and having that partnership loan program kind of set up. Our outreach has been really successful with our AIS and our, you know, decontamination outreach or prevention outreach. You know, doing events. We do a lot of like the fishing tournaments and stuff, kind of like Zach mentioned, setting up a calendar with all of those dates that we know of. We also, you know, kind of tag on with like lake associations when they have like their boat parades or things like that. We try and get to those events where they're going to have a lot of traffic. And then successes and challenges in both funding and high demand. So funding, the success here is that we've been fortunate enough to get consistent and good funding kind of since our inception. The Forest Service money through GLRI is super easy for us to get. Like Ramona said, it's like basically we just say like, hey, we're going to do Clean Boats, Clean Waters this year. And they're like, okay, here's some money. So that's really super nice, and kind of why we're still doing the program. And there's also high demand for the boat washes. A lot of lake associations, you know, we offer like a weekend sign up for all of our lake association contacts early in the year, where if they have picnics or, you know, events or anything that they want us there, they can request weekends that we show up, you know, where they know they're going to have high traffic. That benefits our numbers. You know, we don't have to try and guess when their lake is going to be the busiest. And it helps us kind of schedule out for the 5 counties throughout the year. But that can also be a challenge in and of itself too. Like I've said a couple of times, staffing is a really big challenge for us. A couple of years in a row now where we've tried to hire for boat wash and we just don't get a single person that even like wants to do it, which is crazy to me because it's a pretty easy job. So that can be a challenge. Trying to run it through our strike team is not the way to go. There's just not enough time committed to it, and scheduling is a beast, and it's just not, nobody enjoys it that way. So we try to avoid it, but the last few years we've come down to just like, hey, everybody, you're on a weekend rotation again. So equipment maintenance is by and far one of the bigger issues that we run into. Especially with 4 units now, storage is nearly impossible. We do have an agreement with our Menominee County in Michigan, where they actually passed a resolution that in exchange for a couple of days of boat wash at Shaky Lakes, they'll store 2 of our units in their new storage building. But that still leaves 2 of them to kind of sit out in the winter. And then repairs is a big one. This year we didn't operate our boat washes because they were all in disrepair and we didn't have the money to fix them. And so that, you know, they're all getting pretty old too. You know, if we bought them all back in like 2012, they're pretty old and need some help, and that just can cost a lot. And it also comes down to our trucks too. So we have a couple of work vehicles that our staff uses, but those get kind of, you know, used a lot throughout the summer, and those trucks can break down, and then when that happens, you don't have the vehicles to, you know, just move a boat wash or tow it where you need to. So that can be a challenge that we face as well. And then just putting funding and high demand on here again. You know, I know funding can be a challenge for a lot of people, and trying to, you know, get this, especially if you're not in the GLRI zone. But I think that there's a variety of grants, you know, now especially that are realizing that AIS prevention and decontamination is important. And so I think this is kind of opening up a little bit more. But then the high demand too, is you get kind of tapped out and kind of strapped. And then if you have equipment malfunctions and you have all of these weekends scheduled or tournaments you're supposed to be at, and then you have to tell people like, sorry, we're not going to be there because we don't have the equipment. They can get a little frustrated by that, you know, not getting kind of what they what they were expecting. Yeah, so that's kind of some of the challenges there. But overall, I think one of our biggest successes in the whole program is just like our outreach, doing decontamination demonstrations, doing our trainings, just trying to get that like a more hands-on events and things like that seems to work really well. We do training for other SISMAs and other groups in our area, and that seems to work really well. Also, our social media, like we've done some commercials and we've had like some professionally made stuff. That's been really cool and helps us kind of get the word out there in a different way, a little bit more engaging. Yeah, so I think like overall, if we're talking about like success of the program or what I would change, I think just equipment is a big one. I like the pressure washers, but they're also like a major headache when they don't work, and trying to get them repaired is costly. And, you know, I think I like the idea of having the permanent wash stations. It's just, you know, we've tried to get those funded in a few different ways and haven't been able to get any funded in our area, unfortunately. But we'll kind of keep trying. I think some of those, you know, would work better. It seems to us that a lot of people, you know, if we're there, we'll get them to wash their boats and to do what they need to do and take the right steps. If we're not there, they're just going to leave. And I feel like sometimes it's, you know, there's not the tools there to consistently to let people take these steps on their own sometimes. Yeah, and I think, you know, I don't know, it's hit or miss. I think the timing is a big one. You know, trying to get young staff out at like 5 o'clock in the morning to get those fishermen before they go on a lake, or to stay into the evening when everyone's coming off for the day at sunset. Like that can be a real challenge if you don't have dedicated staff. And I think overall, if we had someone, you know, not me, just like another person within the organization to just focus on this program, it could be a lot better. But just, you know, as a coordinator with all the different hats you have to wear, you know, I can only give a fraction of my time to a decon program. And unfortunately, it never seems to go as quite successfully as I want it to. So I think having just like more dedicated staffing in general for both the coordination of the program and the like, you know, field staff as well would just be helpful. And that's what I got.
Great, thank you very much. Good questions to probably something that the Mike's and Tim's efforts can help address. There were 2 questions in the chat. Maureen asked if there happened to be more funding for an operator in 2014. That was a spike year, I think, for hours that you showed. And then Tim had asked if the Forest Service GLRI dollars were SISMA specific.
Yeah, so definitely in 2014, there was a lot more operator funding. So we had, I think it was like 3 or 4 projects at that. Like that was a little bit before my time, but I think there was like 3 or 4 projects on that year that had money for staff. So we had like 12 just clean boats, clean waters, watercraft inspectors out doing stuff. So, and that's all they did. They weren't doing, you know, terrestrial treatments or invasive species surveying. They were just going out every day and doing boat wash. So there was a lot more time put into it, a lot more money for those staff. Whereas now, like, yes, we have the money to fund like, you know, 2 people full time all summer to go out and just do boat wash, but we can't hire anyone to do that. So it ends up being like an extra day or 2 for our other field crew to go do. So it's kind of it's a weird balance there. It doesn't seem to work out quite as well. And then the Forest Service GLRI money, I'll be honest, I don't 100% know if it's SISMA specific. Honestly, our Forest Service contact will just like email me and be like, are you guys going to do boat wash again? And we'll say yes and give them like a dollar amount, and then they just submit it for us and we just get the money. So I don't actually know fully what program that comes out of. But yeah, I think I want to say it's like funding program 7B or something. I don't know if that means anything, but
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the things, that funding question would be another one to address in the project. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move ahead. So thank you very much, Lindsay. And if Tim, you want to go ahead. So Tim Campbell, who's now with Sea Grant 100%, is going to talk to us.
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry I missed most of the meeting yesterday and won't be around this afternoon, but I see a lot of new names on the participants list, so I think I might just take a minute to introduce myself if you don't know me. Hi, I'm Tim Campbell. As Jeannie said, I work for the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute, and we promote the responsible use of our Great Lakes and ocean resources through education, research, and outreach. So, but just memorize our mission statement, no big deal. But I spend 50% of my time as a Wisconsin AIS outreach specialist, and then a few months ago started another half-time position, also with Sea Grant through UW Sea Grant, but I'll also be working with our National Sea Grant Office and the Fish and Wildlife Service as a national AIS liaison that works with a few different national and regional AIS working groups and trying to do some AIS coordination. So really taking everything that you all taught me about working with AIS in Wisconsin and trying to replicate all of the awesome things we're doing here for some other kind of more regional and national groups. So you'll be hearing a little bit about some of that stuff, I'm sure, as time goes on. So I will bring up my presentation. Maybe. Okay, so I think we have a PowerPoint presentation. Please stop me if we don't. So I just want to share a little bit about some watercraft decontamination happenings outside of Wisconsin. I think we could also just call this like generally what's rattling around in Tim's brain about Wisconsin, because I didn't do a ton of original research. This is just all stuff I've come across in the past 10 years of doing stuff. But first, I have a new baby. Yes, that's exciting. I want to show off my baby. She's adorable. Ramona Campbell. She's 6 months old now, but really I'm just using this as a crutch to try to cover my poor preparation for this. And if I just forget what I'm saying in the middle of the sentence, please stick with me for a few minutes as my brain reboots, because that kind of happens. Also, the other kid got me sick a few days ago, so hopefully I can make it through this without coughing for like 5 minutes. So I think something I brought up earlier that I think will be a good discussion to have is just what does decontamination actually mean, and what do we mean when we use it? Like, should we really be using disinfection? I probably spend way too much time thinking about this, and so I'll bring it up again here in a second, but the Uniform Minimum Protocol and Standards document that the Pacific States Marine Fishery Commission put together with the help of the Western Regional ANS panel, essentially all of the Western states everywhere. If you have the Rocky Mountains in it, you're in the Western Regional Plant panel. Plus, I think anything with, technically like Kansas and Nebraska and the Dakotas are in the Western Regional panel too. So it seems like they get some Great Lakes or Great Plains states as well. Anyway, that's what a lot of people kind of use as like the standard for decontamination across the country for a handful of different reasons. By maybe or sometime I'll tell you what I think about that. But that is the current like standard for this document. It's a really well put together document and outlines I think a really good protocol for watercraft decontamination using hot water. And so their definition of decontamination is hot water treatments with the intent to kill, destroy, and remove AIS to the extent technically and measurably possible. So I think that's the definition they use. And I think generally if you say decontamination, anywhere in an AIS community across the country, that's probably the definition that you're going to get from people. And I know within our decontamination manual code, Maureen, linked to the definition of these, we have kind of two separate but similar definitions. We have disinfection. It's a method of decontamination that destroys or kills all forms of invasive species that may be present, whether or not the presence is known. And then decontamination is the process of removing invasive species and materials that may contain or transmit invasive species. So I think through most of this, I'm going to use the UMPS definition because that's just where my brain goes when I'm thinking. of decontamination, but as a group, it might be good to discuss like what we want our definition to be. Probably so it's inclusive of other approaches like bleach that's being used in some counties, or maybe it's other like supplemental prevention activities like the cleaning station signs, or a CD3 station, or even just a pressure washer that's not hot water. I think those provide some benefit. It's a supplemental prevention activity, so maybe we need to adopt some of that language from the surface water grants. It's like a supplemental prevention activity and then specific language attached to it, so it's really specific as to what we mean. That may not be the best idea, but it's an idea. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time that hopefully we can have with the working group. In the meantime, when I talk about decontamination, I'm probably using the UMPS definition. So here's a handful of things I want to just quickly go over, different examples of decontamination and things people are thinking about across the country. I'll talk about the UMPS document, also just quickly cover two different examples of places using that, Idaho, and then I have Colorado here, but I'm really going to use Lake Tahoe. Recycling a presentation I gave in 2012 about decontamination for some of this stuff. There's a building consensus on the West effort from the National Sea Grant Law Center that I think also helps us understand a little bit why the Western United States is kind of so unified in their approach. They've also been working and helping out me with a project on used watercraft sales between the Great Lakes and the Western US, and has some decontamination ties. And then I also want to just quickly touch on like what Minnesota, Michigan, and then Lake George, New York are doing in regards to decontamination, because those places are a little bit more similar to where we are in Wisconsin. And so this is the lovely UMPS document, or Uniform Minimum Protocol and Standards. It was last updated in 2016. I don't know if they're working on another revision of it or not. For some reason, I think they're always working on another revision of it. But essentially, if you look in the table of contents, it's not a long document, but it's not a short one either. But it very specifically outlines, what they mean for decontamination, a very specific protocol for decontamination, recommended trainings, all of the different like measurable metrics that define decontamination, which is really nice, because I think, as they mentioned, it's to the extent possible and measurable. So, recommending something that you can't actually measure that it's been done is not something that the UMPS document's really for. So what is really good about this protocol is that it is very easily replicable by pretty much anyone with the ability to purchase, a pressure washer. And then they even have recommended pressure washers and vendors and stuff like that. So this is the process that most states in the Western US, I think all of them, are using for their decontamination protocols. And then even people or programs not in the Western US, like I'm pretty sure this is generally the protocol that Minnesota uses. It's what Lake George uses. So when people are talking about washing boats with hot water and pressure washing, they're probably using something that's based off of this. And then I know I have, and a few other people in Wisconsin have also taken the training that is based off of the UMPS document with Quagga D. Davis. Really good training, learn a lot, and I think it's a good perspective on how other people are doing things. And so if you think about kind of the Western US and how some of these protocols are applied, I mean, a lot has changed in 11 years, so I don't know how useful this 2010 Quagga zebra mussel roadside inspection location is for Idaho, but they have much fewer zebra and quagga mussel populations than we do in the Great Lakes region. We're the infected Great Lakes region and high-risk region if you're from the West. And if I remember correctly, Idaho has 0 populations of invasive mussels. So their approach is to try to get people through the major roadways into the state and get you to stop at inspection stations there. And then if there is a major body of water, they might try to place an inspection station on the road that leads to that. So they have a relatively few number of water bodies and a relatively few number of inspection stations. So they don't really need a lot of watercraft decontamination stations to successfully, have like a shielding protocol within Idaho. They can just stop everyone coming in on the major roadways and decontaminate their boats. I mean, I'm sure there's ways around it, small country roads and all that kind of stuff, but then you're trying really hard to, avoid these regulations, and just a lot of sludge in the system. And I think you have to be pretty motivated to avoid the stations, in which case you might as well just get decontaminated because you're putting more effort into avoiding the rules than you are following them. And then, so Lake Tahoe is a different, I guess, a different program. And so instead of looking at protecting an entire state from invasive mussels, they're really looking at protecting a single body of water. So they have, I think, 7 stations across Lake Tahoe. It's surprisingly hard to find a map, but they have centralized stations, the wire tags that you can get inspected, and then they attach your boat to the trailer. Then you need a special clip, or you need wire cutters to clip the wire there. So if you don't have that wire, then they know your boat has been someplace else, or they assume it has. So then you'll need to be decontaminated again. And so that's, I think they spend more than $1 million to run the inspection stations just to keep Lake Tahoe mussel free. And let's see what okay. And so I think something that really kind of connected with me when I went to California for this training and just talking to the different people doing the training is just how important the water sources are to these communities, and just some of the different water regulations that I don't understand as well as I used to. But I'm very, obviously, Wisconsin and Great Lakes centric in my thinking, and we have the public trust doctrine. The lakes and rivers are there for us to enjoy and utilize, and we have a right to that water. It's not the same in the West. Other people, you might be in a state and other people might use or have rights to those waters, and you technically don't have any rights to that water. And so I think what they can do with regulations out there can maybe be more easily done just due to different water rules and regulations and rights. So that's something that I've always, I guess, thought a little bit about when thinking about the differences between here and there. And so this is something that was just recently completed based off of the request, and the request of some Western AIS or Western state AIS coordinators is that the used boat market in the West is such that it's actually a lot cheaper in many cases to buy boats in the Great Lakes region and then have them commercially shipped out west. But the problem there is that a lot of these boats, especially the bigger boats that are being purchased, are slipped for a while. They may have encrusted mussels, but there's not decontamination stations out here for them, and then they're not, the people selling, shipping, and even sometimes purchasing the boats aren't always aware of the decontamination procedures and protocols that need to be done. And so this is just one example of how even the rules and regulations in the Western US might impact how we want to have decontamination here in Wisconsin, because it could, even if we don't change any of the regulations that we want in Wisconsin about decontamination, it could still be a service that some marinas or boat retailers provide, because the places where these boats are going need decontamination. So it might, and I think this was brought up in an email chain recently. I think maybe Amy and Alex were talking about it, but so this could even be a reason to have decontamination, even if we don't want it, more of it anyway. And another kind of factor into how everything in the West is done is the National Sea Grant Law Center brought together all the Western states, their AIS coordinators, as well as attorneys generals in the states to help create model regulations and model legislative provisions to help have standard regulations and legislative provisions, so that way programs across the West were all similar, and so there could be reciprocity between the states. So you could get a boat inspected in Lake Mead and then have that honored at Lake Tahoe, so you're not going through the same hour-long process. But I think that was something that they could do because 10, 15 years ago, they were all at generally the same places with their AIS programs and had a lot of incentive to have very consistent regulations and programs to help keep mussels out of the West, where I think things here in the Great Lakes region, we were being a little bit more responsive to kind of immediate invasions happening in our backyard. But these are available on the National Sea Grant Law Center website, and I think there's a building consensus website page too, but they're pretty interesting reads. And there's also a companion piece to this that just looks at all the different watercraft inspection laws and programs for all the different states. So just looking at what's happening maybe closer to home, Minnesota has a decontamination program that they, excuse me, a decontamination program that they run as part of their watercraft inspection program. And they, unfortunately, there are no events scheduled for the next 30 days, so I can't show you how this map works, but you can look up on the Minnesota DNR website to see where their DNR funded watercraft inspectors are going to be. So you can get a courtesy decontamination, and they try to overlap it with busy times at popular landings. And again, I'm pretty sure they follow the UMPS protocol. Michigan State Extension has a Clean Boats, Clean Waters mobile boat wash program that sounds pretty similar to the programs Lindsay and Ramona talked about earlier, except they travel statewide and try to coordinate with lake groups for specific events. So, but I think that's just one team with maybe 2 pressure washers. It's not a particularly big program. So it's more for, you know, outreach, I think, than anything. And then Lake George really, all the way over in New York, has a much more, I think, like Lake Tahoe-esque program where they have inspection stations and are trying to keep certain invasive species out of Lake George. They follow a kind of an UMP style program for that. So that just leads me to some of our discussion questions after I've quickly, not quickly, after I've covered everything else happening in the other 49 states. I'm sure there's a lot more there. But so for our discussion time, I think what we'd like to do is, now that we've gobbled up all of our extra time that we had, is try to have about 20 minutes in discussion in small groups and 10 minutes to report back and discuss to everyone. And I am going to stop sharing my screen and in the chat share a link to a Word document with some discussion questions. So you